Amidst a bustling railway terminal, a youthful gentleman peruses a piece of correspondence which evidently spoiled his morning. The individual in question is identified as Liam Theodore Battenberg, and it seems his grandmother's affections were not simply troubled by his lack of replies, but rather incinerated into complete cinder. The matriarch communicates quite explicitly that his impending seasonal holiday carries inescapable obligations. To be precise, a matrimonial arrangement initiated by the monarchy remains firmly on the table, regardless of his persistent habit of ignoring her dispatches. Glancing away from the parchment, he utters, "Oh, blast!" Yet a grin touches his lips, suggesting he finds the situation entertaining rather than truly alarming. The elderly woman refuses to surrender, as is always her nature. His associate, River Ross, materializes at his back, inquiring whether the note concerns potential brides. Liam Theodore Battenberg acknowledges this has essentially become a yearly custom by now, whereby each vacation is accompanied by either a strong push toward betrothal or a persistent lecture urging him to pursue courtship. The subordinate notes that romantic missives are delivered to his maritime office on a daily basis. Thus, the choices are undeniably present, prompting Liam Theodore Battenberg to question if the whole affair seems awful and void of purpose. River Ross gazes at him blankly, questioning his meaning. The young gentleman elaborates that he is referring to romance. Setting off at a brisk pace, he instructs his companion to abandon the trivial gossip and reveal his genuine itinerary for the warmer months. Catching his stride, River Ross details his journey toward Gloucester Castle, detailing that his relative is employed maintaining the grounds for the Somerset family. Additional laborers are required there, and he reasoned that productive toil supersedes idleness, especially since the rural atmosphere is pristine and features a neighboring stream suited for bathing. While absorbing this information, a recollection emerges within the officer's mind. An acquaintance from the medical ward had previously remarked upon his apparent absence of vitality, expressing a desire that he might cease evaluating every scenario purely through intellect, and elect to let his emotions guide his path for a change, since a truly magnificent event was certain to occur should he embrace such spontaneity. Returning to current reality, he requests his friend to verify if that family member resides down south, to which River Ross replies with confusion. Disregarding the bewilderment caused by the abrupt pivot, the youth declares an alteration in his own intentions, stating his desire to accompany his comrade on that rustic seasonal getaway. The subordinate remains somewhat flummoxed regarding how to process this unexpected declaration. Simultaneously, within the Somerset estate, a pair of gentlemen share a chuckle, appearing profoundly at ease and completely untroubled. The first individual is designated as Baron Howard, who remarks to Count Somerset that his brother's daughter possesses polite etiquette and a beautiful visage, complimenting his excellent upbringing of the girl. A youthful lady dubbed Vanessa Siren Somerset waits adjacent to them, keeping her gaze lowered as the men negotiate her future akin to bargaining over goods at a bazaar. Count Somerset questions whether they ought to move forward according to their prior arrangement, whereupon Baron Howard stipulates that prior to the nuptials, he requires absolute verification of her maidenhood. As the nobleman decries this demand as a grave affront, the demanding suitor dismisses the offense, noting that damaged goods are unacceptable when entering wedlock for a subsequent time. Furthermore, provided her innocence is satisfactorily validated, her guardian is welcome to request any compensation he desires. Since the suitor is acquainted with an expert possessing an extraordinary talent for determining such intimate matters, the offhand brutality of the exchange is profoundly shocking. Vanessa Siren Somerset's thoughts retreat to the exact moment her entire existence was upended. A gentleman identified as Mr. Watts notified her that because the noble rank had transferred to her father's brother, she possessed absolutely no legal authority to demand any portion of the properties or the lineage's assets. Henceforth, every morsel she consumed, garment she donned, and item she utilized would be dictated by others, encompassing even her eventual matrimony upon reaching adulthood. Returning to the present moment, she finds herself huddled beneath a trunk, expelling the contents of her stomach. Upon rising, she reflects that being labeled an item of commerce seems quite appropriate considering the ordeals she has endured. Her eyes land upon a rotten piece of fruit resting on the earth, bringing the phrase regarding damaged goods rushing back to her consciousness with renewed severity. Subsequently, the scent of burning tobacco reaches her nostrils, prompting her to puzzle over who might conceivably occupy the grounds during such a time. Navigating past the thick trunk, she discovers a male figure resting below its canopy, enjoying a smoke, appearing as though he harbors absolutely zero anxieties in the universe. a fellow whose identity is Liam Theodore Battenberg, although she remains ignorant of this fact. As Vanessa Siren Somerset circles the vegetation, anticipating the discovery of a common groundskeeper, she instead uncovers an unknown gentleman reclining under the foliage, pinching a smoke while sporting a remarkably untroubled expression. This individual is completely unfamiliar to her. The instant he raises his gaze to lock stares with hers, all her bravery evaporates. "Pardon me," she initiates with palpable apprehension. Yet prior to uttering another word, her servant Mary sprints toward them, panting heavily following a frantic hunt across the property. The young lady pivots to inquire if Mary recognizes the stranger's identity, but upon returning her attention forward, the gentleman has vanished, leaving solely the smoking tobacco remnant as evidence of his presence. Unaccountably, this brief meeting stubbornly lingers in her thoughts. Several suns set. Still, she continually catches herself gazing at the landscaping, pondering whether the enigmatic laborer might reappear. 7 days afterward, her curiosity has grown utterly obvious. Perched atop a blossoming bough, River Ross spots her behavior instantly, whilst toiling next to the fellow presently masquerading as his relative, Liam Theodore Battenberg. The subordinate remarks that the noblewoman has been tailing his friend across the grounds for an extended period and obviously desires a conversation. The undercover youth contrastingly appears thoroughly unbothered, questioning if he is truly obligated to engage. He is perfectly aware of the typical trajectory such scenarios follow. She has likely either become instantly smitten or simply wishes to learn his moniker, with either outcome seeming terribly draining. River Ross contends that revealing the reality of the situation would be a more compassionate approach. Ultimately, the disguised gentleman is no true horticulturist, and the lady had once shared childhood games with the genuine worker, despite her current failure to recall his face. Undoubtedly, such a historical tie merits acknowledgement, yet his companion merely chuckles in response. As the conversation shifts and his colleague proposes vacating the tiny equipment hut where he has been resting, the young man leaps from the branches, reiterating that his current persona is River Ross, the industrious nephew of the groundsman. Should he abruptly upgrade to opulent accommodations, the entire charade will inevitably crumble. Once the deception is shattered, his elderly relative will undoubtedly receive word of the failure. Once the matriarch learns of this, he will find himself confined within an ornate venue, besieged by aristocrats and binding betrothal documents. The disguised officer questions if his friend genuinely desires such a disastrous fate for him, prompting the subordinate to hastily abandon the debate. Honestly, I find myself utterly unable to dispute that reasoning any further. Following his companion's departure with a woven container of harvest, the protagonist lingers under the foliage, surveying the expansive property. The location captivates his interest in an unusual manner. The entire atmosphere exudes a mild sense of obsolescence. The paintings displayed along the corridors lack grandeur, while the floor coverings are of poor quality. Furthermore, the household emblem is forged from base metal rather than precious gold. According to any normal metric, he ought to consider the manner tedious and unmemorable. Nevertheless, an unknown force continuously pulls his focus toward the premises, as a profound sense of isolation permeates the air. Prior to concluding the exact nature of this sensation, a piece of fruit unexpectedly plummets from the canopy overhead. The young gentleman pivots to find Vanessa Siren Somerset positioned close by, cradling the dropped produce. She had evidently arrived so silently that her footsteps went entirely undetected. For a brief interval, she remains stationary, summoning her bravery. Subsequently, she inquires if he might allocate a brief moment for a conversation. The disguised youth instantly asserts that he is occupied, although he is currently engaged in no actual labor. Disregarding the fabrication, the lady states she brings a proposal for his consideration. This declaration at last captures his genuine interest. "A proposal?" he questions. Advancing a pace, she extends the harvest and tranquilly proclaims her intention to purchase him. He fixes his gaze upon her as time appears to halt. Among the myriad statements he anticipated encountering this afternoon, that particular phrase was completely unforeseen. He begs her pardon and requests she repeat her astounding desire. He ponders internally while the noblewoman awaits his response, observing her absolute earnestness, and in a flash, the young man recognizes that this dialogue will prove vastly more captivating than he initially presumed. 7 days prior to the lady striding into the flora to attempt the acquisition of a gentleman, she sits accompanied by the sole duo she relies upon sufficiently to converse about her predicament. The mood blends equal parts tactical planning and frantic farce. Throwing out progressively absurd getaway tactics, Rosaline Fabian Winchester even proposes donning her grandmother's vintage gown for an elaborate masquerade. Peering over his reading material, her sibling, Blair Fabian Winchester, questions the reason she holds on to that archaic garment. Offended by the mere inquiry, Rosaline responds as if he just confessed to a heinous felony. Unable to suppress her amusement, Vanessa grins at their petty bickering. She confesses a deep nostalgia for the days they spent bantering freely, untouched by the burdens of matrimonial pacts and aristocratic scheming. Out of nowhere, Blair inquires if she might consider openly declaring a romantic involvement between the two of them. Startled by the unexpected proposition, both young women snap their gazes in his direction instantly. Given that Blair is currently bound by a betrothal, generating a controversy with the Winchester Marquisate's successor would profoundly disrupt the matrimonial plans, which the uncle of Vanessa is currently attempting to mandate. Endorsing the utility of a public disgrace, Rosaline hastily emphasizes that feigning a courtship with her sibling is completely off the table. She embarks on a fiery tirade condemning the hypocrisy of a supposedly progressive culture that continues commodifying female virtue. Blair guarantees their unwavering backing for any path Vanessa selects, regardless of whether her strategy involves fleeing, vanishing temporarily, or openly resisting the betrothal. Expressing her gratitude, Vanessa firmly declines entangling her closest companions in her personal dilemmas. Pacing in the direction of the glass panes to hunt for a personal resolution, she spots a fellow precariously perched on the rungs, harvesting produce from an adjacent branch. Observing her intense visual fixation, Rosaline takes note and comments that Vanessa adopts an unnervingly audacious demeanor the second a scheme forms in her mind. Blair advises his sister to drop the subject entirely. Past events have proven to him that when Vanessa enters this mindset, thwarting her impending actions becomes impossible. Shortly thereafter, Vanessa positions herself under an awning alongside her servant Mary. The duo covertly observes the unfamiliar gentleman from afar. Mary clarifies that the individual happens to be the nephew of River Ross, a naval subordinate who participated in the Battle of Potsdam and lately earned a furlough in recognition of his service. Evidently, he chose to dedicate his holiday time to assisting with the horticultural chores. Furthermore, Mary notes that practically all the female staff on the property have gone frantic with infatuation following his appearance. Vanessa absorbs the information with keen attention. A certain quality surrounding the moniker River Ross awakens a long-forgotten recollection rooted far back in her youth. In a flash, she vividly envisions her juvenile self sprinting across the grounds with a little lad chasing closely, demanding she pause. That mental image dissipates rapidly, abandoning her to merely gawk at the figure stationed below the branches. Subsequently, a highly precarious notion starts taking shape within her mind. To effectively block the transaction of any merchandise, the simplest tactic involves ruining it so thoroughly that all buyers lose interest. Such reasoning borders on the absurd, embodying sheer negligence and absolute irrationality. Regrettably, the concept appears flawlessly logical to a maiden recently labeled as mere cargo by those dictating her destiny. That fellow positioned yonder is an acquaintance from her past, an adequately handsome figure capable of forging a believable controversy, whose arrival perfectly coincided with her crisis. Pivoting to face Mary, Vanessa tranquilly instructs the servant to return indoors, citing an urgent need to converse privately with the enigmatic Mr. Ross. Consequently, this choice leads her directly out into the botanical enclosures. Holding a harvested crop under the foliage, Liam watches Vanessa approach and nonchalantly declare her intention to purchase him. This declaration sounds so preposterous that even the stoic Liam struggles to comprehend it instantly, breaking the ensuing pause by demanding clarification of her intent. Vanessa confirms her absolute literalness, explaining her desire for him to pose as her paramour throughout the warm season, in exchange for substantial financial compensation. Scrutinizing her briefly, Liam instructs her to drop the diplomatic phrasing and unveil her true underlying motive. All traces of whimsical bravado immediately vanish from her countenance. Inhaling deeply, Vanessa confesses her requirement for a controversy devastating enough to permanently obliterate her matrimonial viability and disqualify her from any future betrothals. High society treasures her perceived allure, so the swiftest route to freedom requires achieving disgrace, an agonizing rationale forged by years of enduring ruthless aristocratic standards. Compelling herself to vocalize once unthinkable concepts, Vanessa proceeds to elaborate, suggesting that conceiving a child out of wedlock would finalize her ruin perfectly. Pledging substantial remuneration and absolute shielding from any fallout for his assistance, she assures him they can simply sever ties post-summer and feign mutual amnesia. Liam absorbs her proposal without interjecting, as the surrounding flora descends into utter stillness. Eventually extending his arm to retrieve the produce from her grasp, he brings it to his lips while observing her for moments filled with pure intrigue rather than astonishment or condemnation. Subsequently, he softly poses an inquiry for which Vanessa possesses zero readiness. Suppose the season concludes and your infatuation with me remains unextinguished. Those syllables strike with more devastation than outright refusal, sparking Vanessa's unprecedented realization that genuine romantic attachment was never factored into her scheme. Based on the subtle mirth sparkling in Liam's gaze, he clearly recognizes her oversight, leaving his query suspended in the air as a crimson-faced Vanessa vehemently denies the possibility. Attempting to reclaim authority over the dialogue, she adjusts her stance and commands him to respectfully refer to her as his lady. Glancing at her briefly, Liam questions the necessity of such formalities, noting that true reverence requires a superior bargain, whereas currently, she undervalues herself whilst subsidizing his involvement. That barb strikes deep, prompting Vanessa to retort defensively that financial currency remains her sole remaining asset. At last, Liam lapses into a contemplative hush, allowing his thoughts to wander toward idle gossip he intercepted while laboring among the fruit trees. Servants murmuring regarding an ancient noble, exceeding 70 years of age, arriving to evaluate her as a bride. Fellow workers lamenting the ceaseless procession of aristocratic suitors flocking to the estate post-graduation. An individual noting the catastrophic collapse of her uncle's commercial enterprises. Back then, those rumors seemed trivial, yet they suddenly bear a profound weight. Presently, the lady positioned before him strives frantically to purchase an escape from that precise bleak destiny. Vanessa rapidly clarifies her entitlement to a dormant annuity, which she could successfully claim upon bearing offspring. Guaranteeing annual disbursements spanning half a decade, she vows to somehow generate extra funds if his demands require it. To her detriment, Liam placidly states that financial wealth holds almost no significance in his eyes. After briefly scrutinizing his expression, she unveils her ultimate leverage. She possesses knowledge that Mr. Ross systematically misappropriated the estate's upkeep budget over multiple years. Discrepancies plagued the landscaping ledgers, and she already accumulated definitive proof of the theft, which Liam hears without blinking. Internally, nonetheless, he discovers an unforeseen sense of profound amusement. Elite circles have previously pitched him an exhaustive variety of propositions. Certain individuals propose riches, whereas others promise devotion. A few seek solace, and numerous others desire social elevation. Yet Vanessa's particular pitch boils down to a straightforward desire to procure him financially. However preposterous that pitch may resonate, it remains infinitely more captivating than standard overtures. He questions the relevance of a senior landscaper's transgressions to his own situation, prompting a bewildered Vanessa to cite his supposed familial tie to Mr. Ross, instantly illuminating the misconception for Liam. Rather than clarifying the error, he ignites a smoke and nonchalantly suggests that if she merely desires his summertime companionship, she must abandon pitiful extortion and forthrightly declare her adoration. Liam himself fully acknowledges that he is intentionally offering an infuriatingly incorrect response. Shielding her nostrils from the fumes, Vanessa unequivocally proclaims her total lack of romantic affection for him. Claiming alternative sentiments constitutes outright deception, yet her blunt honesty aggravates him far beyond logical reason. Very well, he declares, unilaterally terminating their proposed arrangement. Alarm briefly overtakes her features as she frantically questions if merely pretending to cherish him will suffice. Chuckling gently while discarding his smoke on the lawn, Liam clarifies that the core issue lies not in the vocabulary, but in his inability to distinguish her genuine confessions from coerced ultimatums. Furthermore, absent any actual emotional resonance on his part, the entire endeavor remains pointless. Parting her lips, Vanessa prepares to demand an exact interpretation of that cryptic statement. Prior to her completing the thought, Liam advances and locks his lips with hers. That unspoken inquiry perishes immediately. Rooted to the spot, Vanessa turns rigid, paralyzed by sheer astonishment. During a fleeting instant, the surrounding botanical haven appears to halt alongside her. Upon their ultimate parting, she manages nothing beyond an incredulous glare in his direction, whilst Liam evaluates her response harboring an identical level of astonishment. His original objective involves simply disorienting her to conclude their parley. Conversely, he discovers his own intrigue amplified significantly beyond its previous baseline. Concurrently, within the manor's walls, Blair Fabian Winchester coincidentally peers through a glass pane, spotting the duo among the greenery. He promptly interrogates the head servant regarding the identity of the gentleman standing alongside Vanessa. The major domo clarifies that the figure reportedly serves as the landscaper's nephew, an off-duty maritime commander assisting with the property's maintenance duties. Gazing past the window pane, Blair Fabian Winchester cannot shake the profound sense of déjà vu that the man's features evoke. In a hushed tone, he orders the head servant to investigate the stranger's background. Even while retrieving his novel, his gaze remains fixed on the courtyard, his thoughts already assembling the fragments of an emerging mystery. Within the estate, Blair Fabian Winchester lingers near the glass, tormented by the lingering suspicion that he has encountered the groundskeeper's relative in the past. This suspicion persists relentlessly until Rosaline Fabian Winchester enters the chamber and instantly questions whose face he recognizes. The attendant offers a courteous greeting upon her arrival, yet she completely disregards the etiquette, collapsing into a seat and peering at the grounds outside. She laments the tedious nature of organizing their imminent lengthy journey, confessing her strong desire for Vanessa Siren Somerset to accompany their party. Considering Vanessa Siren Somerset graciously hosted her at Gloucester Castle prior to the expedition, the repeated refusals of any reciprocation feel deeply frustrating. He points out that Count Somerset is hastily forcing a betrothal, making any possibility of a holiday absolutely impossible. Shock and dismay wash across Rosaline Fabian Winchester's face. It has merely been a few sunsets since her commencement, yet society is already debating her marital prospects as though her destiny is bound to a strict timetable. Still observing the courtyard, he softly proposes that tying the knot could ironically grant her the independence she so desperately needs. In current times, it is rather common for aristocratic figures to keep illicit companions beyond their wedded bonds. She swiftly reprimands him, demanding he cease spouting such absurdities. Her profound affection for Vanessa Siren Somerset prevents her from finding any humor in these dire circumstances, and she insists he ought to refrain from concocting controversial scenarios, while recollecting that he had the luxury of selecting his own betrothed voluntarily. Blair Fabian Winchester utters no further words. Out of everyone alive, he profoundly grasps the absolute truth of her statement. His vision wanders back to the solitary figure strolling through the flora, and inexplicably the visual fills him with a deep sense of dread. A few mornings afterward, Liam Theodore Battenberg and River Ross wait by the tool shack as a new aristocratic coach pulls onto the property. Identifying the guest instantly, River Ross notes that the current suitor is seemingly Count Rowden, indicating the previous negotiations involving Baron Howard have completely deteriorated. Prior to Liam Theodore Battenberg offering a reply, Mary approaches bearing refreshments and nonchalantly declares that the previous Baron would have been preferable, prompting wide-eyed stares from her male companions. River Ross questions the logic behind such a bold assessment, so Mary distributes the beverages and clarifies that Count Rowden possesses an utterly horrifying public standing. The man has taken numerous brides in the past, yet the ultimate fates of these former spouses remain shrouded in chilling mystery. Sinister whispers trail his every step throughout the region. Certain gossips allege he beds all the servants on his payroll, while alternative tales maintain he just sired an offspring with a soldier's bereaved wife. River Ross practically asphyxiates on his mouthful of liquid. The idea that a respectable lineage would knowingly orchestrate such a union completely baffles him. Dropping her volume to a whisper, Mary reveals the grim truth of the matter. Count Somerset has suffered consecutive financial ruin, leaving the household destitute and their honor tarnished, making Vanessa Siren Somerset the sole remaining commodity of worth. Casting a look at the manor, she softly murmurs that during the reign of the late Lord and Lady, such a catastrophic decline would have been utterly unthinkable. On the opposite side of the grounds, Vanessa Siren Somerset suffers through the agonizing introduction, watching Count Rowden recline casually next to Count Somerset, debating her destiny as though she were invisible. The suitor chuckles over the sheer absurdity of almost wedding such a stunning maiden to an elderly gentleman pushing past his 70th winter. Count Somerset replies by expressing relief at narrowly avoiding the loss of a splendid alliance, a comment that leaves Count Rowden highly amused. At one juncture, the prospective groom idly taps her knee like a buyer testing upholstery, with both patriarchs completely oblivious to her immense distress. Eventually, the dialogue pivots to the gossip surrounding her close bond with Blair Fabian Winchester. Count Somerset swiftly waves away the apprehensions, guaranteeing Count Rowden that his niece's connection to the siblings is purely a lifelong platonic tie, and adding that he has meticulously overseen every single detail of her personal affairs. Mollified, Count Rowden notes that the fall season ought to allow ample opportunity to finalize the matrimonial ceremonies. The two nobles share a hearty chuckle before pivoting back to their financial negotiations. Gradually, Vanessa Siren Somerset lifts her gaze. Far across the manicured lawns, past the blooming shrubbery, she notices Liam Theodore Battenberg positioned by the tool house. His stare is locked intensely upon her face. His features are utterly devoid of emotion, a blankness that inexplicably intensifies her anguish. Only now, after an entire day of suffering, does she finally sense that an observer truly witnessed her humiliation. As dusk settles, Liam Theodore Battenberg strolls past the flower beds and suddenly detects the sound of shoes hurrying up his rear. Reaching his side, Vanessa Siren Somerset breathlessly declares that a conversation between them is absolutely mandatory. Maintaining his steady pace, he retorts that their avenues of dialogue have already been entirely exhausted. The distressed noblewoman utterly rejects his dismissive attitude. Shouting in his direction, she sprints forward and firmly barricades his route with her own body. He is compelled to halt, leading to a brief interlude of heavy, unbroken silence. Summoning her bravery, she abruptly vocalizes the most unexpected demand conceivable. She wants a repetition of his previous action. Startled, he asks for clarification, prompting her crimson-flushed face to forcefully command him to lock lips with her. She confidently insists that her performance will be vastly improved on this secondary attempt. He merely gazes at her in disbelief, as a petition for a romantic redo was entirely absent from his expectations for the afternoon. He inwardly questions if she genuinely just sought an appraisal for a romantic gesture she had initially never asked for. The gravity of her words dawns on him moments later, instantly escalating the exchange into territory far more perilous than they had planned. Though she repeatedly vows to improve her technique, he pays her assurances virtually zero heed. Striding right around her, he indifferently states that recreating the embrace will alter nothing, as he finds her completely devoid of romantic appeal. His crushing rejection lands with brutal force, prompting raw terror to instantly illuminate her features. Seizing his fabric tightly to prevent his departure, she frantically blurts that the matrimonial deadline has been finalized. Come the fall harvest, she is destined to become the lawful wife of Count Rowden. The union is no longer a mere abstract threat, it is an unavoidable impending reality. Pivoting to face her, he advises that her profound desperation would be better solved by seeking an alternative partner, rather than pursuing him across the grounds. She clarifies that her excursions beyond Gloucester Castle are strictly forbidden, and she remains under relentless surveillance even inside the boundaries. When he proposes smuggling a suitor from town, she reveals that Count Somerset meticulously vets every single visitor crossing the threshold. His subsequent idea of complete elopement finally subdues her tone, as she confesses she is the solitary mourner tending to her nearby ancestors' graves. He observes her intensely, questioning if she genuinely plans to forfeit her destiny to honor corpses, resigning herself to be fodder for aristocratic rumor-mongers. Shifting tactics, she inquires if his memories of her existence have truly been entirely erased. She brings up their shared childhood amusements, causing him to freeze in his tracks. At this exact juncture, he realizes he ought to confess that his identity is unequivocally not River Ross. The dilemma remains that disclosing his secret would simply prompt her to locate the genuine gardener and offer him the identical pact. Given his friend's compassionate nature, there exists a terrifying probability that the real employee would consent purely out of pity. Prior to him finalizing a course of action, she resumes justifying her bizarre proposition. She fully acknowledges that the arrangement comes across as deeply offensive. Her motive for targeting him lies in his commoner status. Lacking a peerage, any ensuing disgrace would inflict drastically less ruin upon him than upon her. Chuckling, Liam Theodore Battenberg questions if she would have ever pitched the idea had he possessed aristocratic rank. She swiftly negates the notion with a firm shake of her head. Involving an affluent lord would only prompt Count Somerset to mandate a wedding, transforming the scandal into yet another lucrative mercantile exchange. Such an outcome is precisely the fate she is fighting to escape. Wedlock holds absolutely zero significance, absent a foundation of profound, genuine affection for one's partner. Furthermore, following the season's conclusion, She will bear the brunt of the scrutiny while he vanishes, leaving the controversy entirely on her shoulders. Tenderly clasping his fingers, she murmurs that the warm months are incredibly fleeting. Very soon, all of these current events will dissolve into nothingness. He remains motionless, weighing his choices. He might embrace her scheme under the guise of the lowly horticulturalist she perceives. Alternatively, he could unmask himself and wield his ducal authority, or he might completely abandon the situation to resume his tranquil holiday. The conclusion crystallizing in his thoughts is humiliatingly straightforward. He is thoroughly entertained, and crucially, this lady provides the most fascinating diversion he has encountered in ages. Before a single word leaves his lips, she abruptly turns rigid and gasps his assumed moniker. Tremors completely overtake her vocal cords. He quickly inquires about the source of her sudden alarm. Gesturing wildly toward her own torso, she breathes out that an arachnid has landed on her. He urges her to remain calm and clarify the situation. Moments afterward, she collapses onto the grass, proclaiming her absolute conviction that the creature has slipped beneath her garments. Moving to her rear, he initiates a visual inspection of the fabric. Following a brief search, he locates the alleged intruder and promptly brushes it off. She instantly spins her body, desperately questioning if he successfully removed the threat. He informs her that the terrifying beast was likely nothing more than a stray lock of her own hair. Vanessa outright rejects his claim, demanding a more meticulous inspection since she remains entirely convinced a creature slipped beneath her garments. Liam questions if she genuinely wishes for him to continue his investigation. To his utter astonishment, she bobs her head in eager agreement. For a fleeting second, he legitimately cannot distinguish if she is attempting an intricate seduction or just being incredibly naive. Regardless of her motives, the predicament has turned exceedingly uncomfortable. Suppressing his amusement, he leans in to resume his inspection, while Vanessa anxiously awaits reassurance that the dreadful intruder has vanished. The gap separating the two of them abruptly seems much narrower than it did moments ago. The balmy night breeze becomes unusually fraught, with neither individual appearing entirely certain how to handle the ensuing quiet. What initiated as a mundane dispute inexplicably concludes with both standing much nearer than anticipated, and for the primary instance today, neither possesses the words to proceed. Liam's palm lingers against Vanessa's spine as she gently breathes his moniker. He informs her that no arachnid can be located, questioning if they ought to halt their efforts there. However, Vanessa soundlessly shakes her head from side to side. What commenced as a hunt for a fictitious bug gradually transforms into an encounter neither had anticipated. The physical space keeping them apart completely vanishes. Shortly after, the pair shares a second embrace, and the mood turns significantly more personal than they initially envisioned. Vanessa grapples with reconciling the adult standing in front of her against the nostalgic image she holds in her mind. She recalls River Ross as a boisterous lad running after her through courtyards, only to be abandoned whenever she sprinted too swiftly. This current individual seems utterly transformed, possessing greater self-assurance and proving much harder to comprehend. Despite her best efforts, she finds it impossible to cease pondering which iteration represents his true self. Ultimately, Liam withdraws slightly to analyze the look on her face. He questions whether she remains completely positive that she will avoid shedding tears over him once the warm season concludes. Vanessa stays mute for a brief interval. Liam proposes turning the matter into a gamble, which ultimately provokes a response. She instantly retorts that no one could possibly develop feelings for a man like him, prompting a grin from him since her reply reveals significantly more than she meant. Nevertheless, he adopts a solemn tone to clarify his reluctance to entangle his existence with obligations he is ill-equipped to handle. Vanessa inquires whether he intends that remark at face value or if some hidden motive fuels his declaration. Liam merely responds that she will have the opportunity to quench that inquisitiveness as the days pass. Provided she genuinely wishes to maintain an uncomplicated and fleeting dynamic, then perhaps they might relish the setup for exactly what it represents. While tenderly grasping her cheeks, he cautions her that even this endeavor harbors inherent perils. An aristocratic lady's standing is delicate, and once tainted, it seldom heals completely. Vanessa stands up, resolving that if they proceed with this endeavor, she requires one stipulation of her choosing. She holds out her arm, declaring that for the duration of this pact, they must approach it with earnestness. She refuses to partake in a superficial affair that vanishes following a few encounters. Assuming they intend to feign a romance, she insists it must appear genuine. Liam gazes at her extended palm, finding her demand peculiarly humorous in spite of himself. Among all the things she might have requested, she opted for authenticity. Following a momentary hesitation, he takes her hand in agreement. The exchange takes on an unpredictably ceremonious atmosphere. In some inexplicable way, that basic action causes the whole pact to feel vastly weightier than the dialogue that spawned it. Subsequently, Vanessa averts her gaze in obvious mortification, bringing up their previous gamble. She exudes absolute certainty. Should the very skies collapse, she vows to never be the initial party to confess affection for him. Liam chuckles, expressing his eagerness to observe how long her bravado can endure, although he notes he ought to point out his lack of faith in deities. Vanessa questions whether they ought to resume their previous activities. As the warm dusk descends upon them, Liam catches himself pondering a remark she made prior. Vanessa had asserted that the warm season is brief. Based on his past encounters, the southern warm seasons endure perpetually. The warmth persists while the daylight hours drag on without end. Moreover, each passing year, this period causes blossoms to open that appeared completely unremarkable merely days prior. Gazing at Vanessa's siren Somerset, Liam cannot avoid contemplating that they likely ought to have avoided establishing that wager. Simply because, regardless of whether either individual has recognized it yet, the warm season has only just commenced. Returning to the botanical supply hut, Liam shoves the entryway ajar, advising Vanessa to mind her crown as she enters. She walks into the confined space, surveying the interior with hushed intrigue. The location is vastly more basic than any environment she normally occupies. However, in some inexplicable way, it provides a cozier atmosphere than numerous opulent chambers within the grand residence. Liam instructs her to relax if she feels fatigued, stepping back outdoors to gather some liquid. Now solitary, Vanessa takes a seat on the mattress edge, releasing a drawn-out breath. Every event that unfolded among the flowers continuously loops within her mind. Furthermore, the longer she contemplates the situation, the more doubtful she becomes regarding her current actions. Ultimately, her gaze wanders toward a desk laden with private possessions. As Liam comes back lugging a pail of hydration, he spots her inspecting the objects with undeniable fascination. Vanessa observes that a number of the items appear surprisingly costly. She has previously noticed comparable lavish items within the chambers of her aristocratic acquaintances. Does the maritime wage truly provide such abundance? Liam responds that the compensation is not entirely meager. Vanessa promptly advises him that he ought to expend fewer funds on frivolous extravagances. Liam merely smirks, declaring he shall handle his own economic affairs. Their dialogue slowly transitions into a much calmer exchange. Liam aids her in refreshing herself, even as Vanessa firmly states her complete ability to manage the task independently. He highlights the absence of a looking glass within the shack, questioning if she remains entirely positive she can handle every aspect without viewing her own reflection. That comment elicits a self-conscious expression from her. She inquires whether her appearance truly looks that unkempt. Liam notes that she resembles someone who devoted the dusk to forming dubious choices among the flora. Vanessa instantly instructs him to pump the brakes, arguing that matters have not advanced nearly as much as his words suggest. Liam offers her a bewildered stare as she flounders to justify her statement. By the moment she grasps what he has truly been accomplishing, their verbal exchange has already progressed. Her tresses have been meticulously woven without her even detecting the process. Vanessa touches her head in sheer astonishment, gazing at the outcome. It is exquisitely crafted. She queries where he acquired the skill to execute such a technique. Liam merely stares at her, entertained by her inquiry, and remarks that he might reveal the answer during their subsequent encounter. In the meantime, inside the grand estate, Mary has dedicated the majority of the afternoon to hunting for Vanessa. The instant she finally materializes, the servant instantly insists upon a justification. Vanessa offers apologies, asserting she inadvertently dozed off among the flowers whilst perusing a book. Mary distinctly dismisses every syllable of the excuse, and while aiding in fixing Vanessa's attire, spots the fabric band in her tresses soiled with earth and vegetation. Paying little mind to the item, she proposes tossing it in the refuse. Vanessa's fingers clamp around the fabric strip almost instantaneously. Following a short quietude, she instructs Mary to refrain from tossing it. For an inexplicable motive, she senses a possibility of requiring its use in the future. Mary shoots her a doubtful glare, yet sensibly resolves to refrain from posing any additional queries. Later that evening, the manor descends into tranquility. Within the botanical storage structure, Liam rests solitary upon the rim of his cot. For a duration, he gazes at a garment resting in his palms prior to discarding it and reclining to stare at the roof. Slumber stubbornly refuses to arrive. On the other side of the property, Vanessa rests in her chamber, rolling the fabric strip back and forth amidst her digits, convincing her own mind she possesses no cause to continue pondering the man. Nevertheless, her contemplations incessantly wander back toward the flora, the storage structure, and the peculiar pact they struck. Neither individual is slumbering, neither is prepared to confess the reason, and the most amusing aspect remains that the warm season has scarcely even started. Rosaline Fabian Winchester occupies a seat in Vanessa's chamber, having utterly forsaken the rivercraft excursion to Dunstar River that consumed her conversational topics for the bulk of the preceding annum. As Vanessa mentions she ought to have attended, particularly given her earlier enthusiasm, Rosaline theatrically crumples the printed broadsheet within her grasp, announcing adamantly that departing is entirely out of the question as long as Vanessa remains unwell. Seconds pass before her gaze zeroes in on a prominent news banner. Goodness, the Duke of Battenberg has vanished, a revelation that instantly commands the room's focus while Rosaline recites the text and rapidly formulates a personal hypothesis. Because the nobleman evidently continues managing his estate via correspondence and telecom, she theorizes his disappearance is merely a tactic to dodge the crown's matchmaking schemes. She believes that any individual capable of fascinating him to the point of staging a vanishing act must be truly remarkable. Vanessa briefly inspects the accompanying portrait, and although the picture is fuzzy and indistinct, a certain feature of the man's visage unsettles her. An odd sense of recognition washes over her. Prior to her dwelling on the thought, Rosaline catches her gazing and instantly charges her with harboring a crush on the nobleman. The speed with which Vanessa refutes the claim makes her rebuttal seem highly questionable. Precisely then, Blair Fabian Winchester strolls into the parlor, inquiring predictably, "Fascinated by whom?" Their dialogue ultimately shifts toward the lounge, with the Daily Gazette remaining the focal point of their exchange. Rosaline argues fervently that the nobleman's countenance is precisely the type to inspire instant, lifelong romantic fantasies. Vanessa counters by noting the image is terribly distorted, making it nearly impossible to discern his true appearance. Pausing his reading, Blair shuts his volume briefly to present an entirely contrasting viewpoint. According to all the rumors he has gathered, the nobleman's personal affairs are an absolute catastrophe. Unidentified ladies supposedly turn up at his residence frequently, asserting they are pregnant with his offspring. More bizarrely, not a single public likeness has been distributed since his 10th birthday, a fact Blair deems highly alarming. Gentlemen simply do not conceal their identities so thoroughly unless they have something to hide. Rosaline promptly scolds him for disparaging a gentleman far handsomer than he is, prompting Blair to question the need to mock her own twin, until Vanessa finally orders them to cease bickering. Blair yields, yet he delivers one concluding remark for her consideration. Males never act without an underlying motive. Vanessa nods nonchalantly as Rosaline flourishes the publication, arguing that such intrigue is completely natural. Above all else, Vanessa must regain her health swiftly, given they have an impending outdoor luncheon that is simply unmissable. A few afternoons afterward, the absent Lord of Battenberg occupies a rustic tool house, holding a receiver closely to his head. Across the connection, Norman delivers the standard updates, confirming the yearly philanthropic contribution was safely deposited, and the maritime business is running flawlessly. Edgar is scheduled to journey southward shortly, carrying a batch of vital records. Liam absorbs the information in silence, verifying that all matters are satisfactorily arranged. Norman cautiously inquires if there is any likelihood of a premature homecoming, but Liam reiterates his firm stance that his holiday will be spent right where he is. Norman assents at once, though he cannot help but note that the Dowager is coping dreadfully with the circumstances. She has essentially forsaken all public engagements, devoting her hours to wandering restlessly from her bedchamber to the grounds, endlessly grumbling about her truant heir. Liam instructs his aide to comfort the matriarch by promising his return at a time of his own choosing, suggesting she tone down her theatrical lamentations. Unsurprisingly, this spurs Norman to pose the inquiry on everybody's mind. Has he at last encountered a lady deserving of matrimony? Liam dryly questions if the most recent gossip still insists he ran off to wed in secret. Norman responds that he merely wants prior warning should matrimonial arrangements abruptly be required. Just as their exchange nears its conclusion, Liam peers out the cabin's glass pane and spots an intriguing development. Vanessa Somerset, allegedly too bedridden to depart her quarters, is meandering across the property's lawns, appearing completely robust and well. Crucially, she is unaccompanied no longer. Blair strolls alongside her, and the pair seem entirely engrossed in a serious dialogue. Liam observes their interaction steadily for a few moments. The lightheartedness on his visage gradually evaporates, replaced by a much keener, concentrated intensity. Upon resuming his speech, his vocal timbre shifts drastically. Prior to disconnecting the line, he issues Norman a fresh directive. He demands a thorough accounting of Vanessa Somerset's financial liabilities, her academic standing, her companions' identities, and her romantic background. Every single scrap of information must be included, leaving absolutely nothing out. Within the snug confines of the Greenery Cafe, Vanessa takes a seat opposite Rosaline and Blair, clutching a legal agreement. The instant Rosaline spots the documents, she nearly leaps from her chair, insisting on knowing if Vanessa is inking a deal for a new book. Upon Vanessa's affirmation, Rosaline beams instantly, especially since this particular pact features a covert marketing push. Should all proceed smoothly, Vanessa might achieve renown much earlier than anticipated. Vanessa chuckles gently, conceding that this milestone would be impossible absent their assistance. Had she attempted to forge this career solo, her guardian would certainly have forbidden the endeavor. Her earnest tone almost pushes Rosaline to weep, prompting Blair to avert his gaze discreetly as Rosaline theatrically proclaims she is overcome by sentiment. Attempting to lift their spirits, Vanessa volunteers to purchase their supper tonight, leaving Rosaline on the verge of actual tears. Regrettably, Blair selects that precise instant to utter a remark that entirely shatters the joyous ambiance. He notes that Vanessa has no reason to wear herself out attempting to hoard every penny. Following her nuptials, her spouse's wealth shall seamlessly transfer to her disposal too. A regular stipend will be provided to her. Monetary stability shall cease to be an issue. Rosaline whirls on him without hesitation. She chides him for breaking his vow to derail the wedding at all costs, questioning fiercely if his loyalties have shifted. Blair placidly maintains that he is merely facing the facts. Being an intimate acquaintance of Vanessa and her kin, he senses a duty to confront the truth rather than ignoring its existence. Rosaline counters that he speaks of the union as a foregone conclusion, suggesting Vanessa might just wish to sample a normal career out of personal interest. Perhaps she warrants enthusiastic support rather than yet another sermon regarding matrimony. The dispute slowly tapers off, yet a palpable strain lingers in the air. All present at the gathering recognize the underlying truth. Vanessa isn't authoring fiction merely as a leisure activity. She is frantically seeking a method to achieve financial independence, so she avoids being used as a pawn, a fact Blair grasps perfectly, making his comments particularly hurtful. Her guardian places no value on her joy, prioritizing only the wealth her betrothal will secure him, meaning she must tackle the root cause to gain true liberty. Blair scrutinizes her intently prior to questioning if she genuinely plans to shun wedlock indefinitely. Society is harsh on females lacking influential backing, and her guardian will certainly not surrender easily. Subsequently, dropping his volume, he inquires if she has perhaps already given her affections to a specific gentleman. Vanessa shoots the notion down instantly, clarifying that another suitor is not the complication. The problem lies in the fact that this destiny contradicts her late parents' wishes for her, and it equally defies her own desires. Rosaline quiets down, and Blair mirrors her silence. Following a prolonged hesitation, Blair gingerly proposes that she might be unwise to rule out matrimony entirely. Whether she weds officially or opts for an unconventional partnership, she ought to ponder establishing a household prior to abandoning the concept altogether. Should she taste that specific brand of bliss, she could find that the institution of marriage isn't inherently malicious. An unforeseen avenue might exist that she hasn't yet pondered, a statement that leaves the table speechless and brings their chat to a sluggish halt. Initially that day, the trio of companions senses a divide deeper than mere debate. Despite their mutual affection, a profound barrier keeps them emotionally isolated. As they exit the bistro, Vanessa harbors a sense of letdown she had not anticipated experiencing. While she foresaw the challenge of swaying opinions, the true pain stems from discovering her dearest confidants fail to comprehend the reasons behind her fierce struggle. Strolling homeward across the botanical grounds later on, their dialogue echoes persistently in her thoughts. A fraction of her anticipated that Blair and Rosaline would grasp her plight instantly, given their extensive shared history. Conversely, she perceives an even greater sense of isolation than she possessed prior to arriving at the eatery. Suddenly, she catches sight of a figure in the distance. Liam is positioned beneath the twilight sun, a canine resting at his feet. The beast seems vigilant, whereas Liam projects an air of absolute tranquility. He looks her way, catching her advance until their gazes lock, prompting Vanessa to approach and offer a relaxed greeting of, "Long time no see, River Ross." Liam instructs the hound to remain stationary prior to returning his attention to her, replying, "Indeed. It has been a while, Vanessa." Their interaction is utterly mundane. Devoid of matrimonial debates, bargaining, or preachings regarding her destiny, it is merely an uncomplicated salutation. Following the day's exhausting events, this tiny slice of normalcy provides a surprisingly profound solace. For the initial moment since departing the cafe, Vanessa discovers a genuine grin gracing her face, a detail Liam catches at once. Both refrain from commenting on the shift, opting instead to amble side by side into the dimming seasonal glow. Returning to the botanical outbuilding, Liam dispenses a cup of tea for Vanessa, remarking that he assumed she had fled in terror. She questions whether he had genuinely been lingering there in anticipation of her arrival. He regards her in silence before mentioning that news of her illness had reached his ears. Pausing motionlessly for a second, Vanessa confides that she utilized the downtime to contemplate her next necessary steps. In particular, the scheme to destroy her public image since bearing an offspring is no longer an option. Perched on the mattress's edge, Liam notes that a mere whisper regarding a lady lingering outdoors with a gentleman after dark would inflict tremendous harm, even across the traditional southern region. Vanessa contends that such trivial matters never make it into the daily press. Echoing the phrase about published periodicals, Liam seems to thoughtfully chew over the idea. While Vanessa falls silent prior to systematically detailing her available choices, summoning reporters, feigning a nervous collapse, fetching a physician, and playing the part of a lunatic, Liam advises her against initiating a theatrical act that she will be unable to maintain indefinitely. She inquires whether portraying a brazen lady who hurls herself at every gentleman would be suitable. Meeting her gaze, he remarks that she is presently engaged in exactly that behavior. Murmuring a quiet realization, Vanessa takes a prolonged swallow from her teacup. Rising to his feet, Liam warns that committing to a precarious strategy will merely wreck her future. Vanessa declares that her sole purpose for arriving this afternoon was simply to gaze upon him, while also informing him of her improved health. While she rummages through her handbag, he playfully tosses her locks, remarking that her tone mirrors a tradesman attempting to establish trustworthiness with a customer. She suggests that if his schedule is demanding, he ought to return to his duties, since she likewise possesses tasks demanding completion this afternoon. Despite his continuous toying with her tresses, she retrieves her drafted pages and commences scribbling, prompting him to glance at the papers and question whether it constitutes a work of fiction. Confirming this, she explains that accumulating funds beyond her given stipend is necessary, making the book a practical endeavor. While drafting, recollections of the remarks made by Blair and Rosaline emerge in her mind, echoing that exerting such immense effort is pointless given her impending post-marital income, especially considering she does not require this labor for survival. Pausing to ponder this notion, she shifts her attention to Liam to probe if he similarly deems such occupations superfluous for aristocratic ladies. Observing her expression closely, he vehemently denies holding that opinion, asserting that undertaking these efforts vastly exceeds total idleness. She questions whether he possesses faith in the worth of earnest labor. He states that his allegiance firmly lies in the significance of wealth. Acknowledging his candor, she voices a brief sound of acceptance. Moreover, the stark directness of his reply provokes an involuntary grin to touch her lips. Stepping away briefly, Liam observes her prior to uttering her moniker, then bridges the gap to plant his lips against hers. Following his preparation of the sleeping arrangement, Vanessa requests a pause, insisting on dealing with River beforehand. He questions whether he ought to cease his advances. A mere bodily touch leaves her chest hammering violently as though she had completed an exhausting marathon. Furthermore, an overwhelming surge akin to sheer terror courses deeply within her veins. Her mind drifts to his prior inquiry concerning her certainty about not throwing a weeping tantrum in his presence once autumn arrived. Staring into his visage, she resolves that retreating from this path is utterly impossible now. Liam bridges the distance once more, capturing her mouth in another embrace, wrapping them in profound silence inside the outbuilding, whereas the scorching seasonal blaze continues relentlessly outdoors. Upon the mattress anew, Liam cradles Vanessa, fighting a profound internal disturbance stemming from an inexplicable source. All previous individuals who chased his affections brought transparent lust alongside foreseeable intentions, none of which managed to stir his spirit. Her uniqueness manifests in elusive manners he fails to properly identify, and this precise ambiguity frustrates him immensely. He reflects that he ought to have anticipated this outcome from the instant he first spotted her resting beneath those branches. The truly astonishing revelation is his complete and eager acceptance of this unfolding destiny. Following a journey by coach, he finds himself seated opposite his relative, an individual known as Edgar Powell Marlborough, whose gaze sweeps the rural surroundings with obvious revulsion, as he questions whether Liam genuinely enjoys residing in such a dilapidated, cramped, and filthy location. Liam remarks that the accommodations are perfectly acceptable. Edgar remains baffled as to why anyone would decline royal nuptials just to vanish into this remote wasteland. To his mind, the sole logical reasoning must involve a concealed offspring, a scandal that might finally explain the matriarch's continuous outrage. Liam bluntly retorts that wedding the royal heir would merely degrade him into a highly decorated subordinate within her household. When Edgar persists with his inquiries, Liam instructs him to depart if his only purpose is to spew absurdities. Edgar falls silent, scrutinizing his cousin briefly before observing that his entire aura has shifted since their previous encounter, adding that he remains incapable of pinpointing the exact alteration. Suddenly, an occurrence beyond the carriage pane captures Liam's attention, causing an involuntary transformation of his countenance before he can conceal it, leading him to vigorously move his skull and apply palm to forehead as though recalibrating his thoughts. Catching the gesture instantly, Edgar inquires if an introduction to the lady is desired. Liam responds with a confused query. Edgar elaborates that the parasol-wielding figure is Haley Morton from the prestigious Morton Mark estate, emphasizing that such a liaison would yield significant commercial advantages, and noting that her attractive appearance would certainly guarantee his grandmother's immense approval of the union. Observing Edgar's poorly suppressed smirk, Liam muses that his relative ought to attempt obscuring his face whilst proposing such schemes. Subsequently, Liam casually comments on the attractiveness of her throat. This remark falls so lifelessly that only the coachman's declaration of their destination rescues the atmosphere from utter deadpan quiet. Gaping at his cousin, Edgar voices profound bewilderment, prior to mentioning to Liam that the lady might be rather pleased by such a compliment. Following this exchange, he exits the vehicle. Peering through the glass, Liam observes Edgar strolling over to relieve Haley of her sunshade. As her visage angles marginally toward the cab, he scrutinizes her features and concludes there is absolutely zero resemblance between the two women. This realization instantly drags his mind to the previous evening spent alongside Vanessa, recalling the cramped nature of the equipment hut and how utterly engrossed he became in her, resembling someone bereft of all rational sense. He releases a muted exhalation of self-reproach. Subsequently, Haley's gaze wanders toward the transport, catching his stare, and for a fleeting second, they both remain perfectly still while Liam occupies his seat, his thoughts completely fixated on a different person. Positioned at her writing table with the manuscript spread open, Vanessa finds herself unable to compose a single word. Her mind has retreated entirely to the confines of that outdoor utility structure, ensnared by a remarkably tranquil recollection. Liam rested on the cot's border, urging her to rouse herself and consume food since her extensive shouting must have left her utterly drained. She commanded him to cease his mockery, yet proceeded to devour the entire meal regardless. Later, as she gathered her belongings prior to the dawn's arrival, he inquired about her departure, to which she replied that Mary would seek her out at daybreak, promising to return the next evening. He instructed her to avoid visiting the following day. Staring at him in astonishment, she listened as he revealed his impending absence for several sunsets, and before she could formulate a response, he dragged her into a tight embrace, leaving her planted there utterly bewildered, questioning the meaning of his action, to which he promised that a reward would be hers provided she waited compliantly. Returning to reality, she rests her brow against the desk, audibly whispering that their dynamic closely mirrored true romance, noting that an entire 7 days have passed since their final encounter. Eventually, she silently commands herself to regain her composure. Entering the room, Mary questions her current activities. Vanessa swiftly corrects her posture and feigns idleness, yet Mary's visage blatantly indicates she bears important tidings. Any news Mary intended to deliver rapidly loses its relevance, since Vanessa abruptly finds herself situated in the primary drawing room opposite Count Rowden, who cheerfully notes the lengthy gap in their meetings, adding that his betrothed appears quite displeased by his arrival. Vanessa counters that his unannounced appearance merely startled her, especially since her guardian is currently absent. He dismisses the concern, claiming prior knowledge of this fact and asserting that she was his sole intended host regardless. He mentions his original intention to progress at a leisurely pace, though his demanding itinerary has eliminated that luxury. Prior to Vanessa seeking clarification, the entryway swings wide to admit Count Somerset alongside an aged matron presented as Madame Luther, a renowned specialist in her profession. Vanessa echoes the phrase "her profession" as a bewildered inquiry. Count Rowden regards her with faint astonishment, questioning whether Somerset failed to disclose the matter, as he had presumed her fully briefed. Vanessa points out that her uncle completely omitted this detail. Count Rowden casually clarifies that among individuals of their social rank, performing this routine prenuptial check is customary to ensure spousal loyalty and protect future offspring. The nobleman further notes that discovering flaws in a costly acquisition would naturally lead to immense dissatisfaction for any buyer, right? Staring at the man in silence for a while, Vanessa softly questions whether he is demanding verification of her virginity. Expressing satisfaction that they are on the same page, he confesses his minor worries regarding her time at a boarding academy, noting how modern girls tend to be quite liberated. Doesn't she agree? Rising to her feet, Vanessa declares that any lack of trust should immediately dissolve their betrothal and promises to relay the entirety of today's events to her uncle. Halting her departure, Count Rowden seizes her wrist, prompting her to furiously question his aggressive actions. Fixing his gaze upon her, Count Rowden commands the young woman to remain silent, take a seat, and part her thighs. Absolute silence instantly consumes the chamber. Vanessa observes the man as though his true nature has finally been unveiled before her eyes. The shocking reality of his character will be incredibly difficult to erase from her memory. Moving intimately near Vanessa, Count Rowden urges her to cease her immature weeping while inquiring how he might soothe her distress, requiring her utmost restraint to keep from speaking her unfiltered thoughts. Advancing with the composed confidence of an experienced practitioner, Madame Luther details her evaluation process. The woman states that placing merely one droplet of blessed liquid upon the flesh shall expose the absolute truth. She elaborates that a virtuous maiden's skin will hold the moisture peacefully, whereas a tarnished figure will cause the fluid to rapidly slide off. Upon hearing this, Count Rowden expresses his approval, noting that the strong endorsements from numerous aristocratic women finally make sense. Madame Luther then requests a peaceful start to the examination, simultaneously suggesting that the nobleman temporarily exit the premises. Following his departure, the elderly woman positions herself beside Vanessa and instructs the girl to extend her limb. Meeting the examiner's gaze, Vanessa murmurs her skepticism regarding the procedure, failing to comprehend how mere liquid might validate someone's innocence. In response, Madame Luther insists that this relies on one's internal guilt, implying that an innocent person would exhibit no physical tremors. The older woman questions whether a hidden secret within the girl's soul is causing her to shiver so noticeably. Freezing in place, Vanessa thoroughly processes the situation in her mind. Subsequently, she informs the evaluator that Count Rowden's willing exit signifies his absolute reliance on the examiner's final judgment. Consequently, regardless of the droplet's behavior, the older woman holds the power to fabricate any conclusion she desires. The elderly lady offers an affirmative response. Interrupting the woman immediately, Vanessa declares her intention to financially secure a favorable outcome. Amidst the relentless downpour outside the estate, Vanessa remains stationary on the steps, soaking in the weather while reflecting that had this ordeal occurred prior to surrendering her innocence, the situation might have been enthusiastically embraced as the precise controversy she had constantly desired and prayed to experience. However, her previously coveted dream has ironically transformed into a secret she frantically attempts to conceal. Suddenly, a canopy shields her from the storm, revealing Liam positioned nearby as he questions her visible distress. With teardrops blending into the precipitation masking her features, Vanessa gazes at the man, realizing her profound reluctance for this season to conclude. Yielding to impulse, she wraps her arms around him without hesitation. The young man remains entirely speechless, and during the shower he simply stays motionless, permitting her embrace. Sometime after, while lounging together inside the horticultural outbuilding, Liam questions why she suppressed her vocals so intensely when he assumed her vocal cords had recovered. "Suppose someone discovers us here?" Vanessa inquires anxiously. "I thought that was your original goal," Liam counters smoothly. She clarifies that being discovered at this current juncture would deliberately place him in severe peril. Rising to a seated position, she insists that any exposure of their affair must strictly occur after her departure from the estate. Regardless of the risks, he urges her to vocalize her discomfort freely if she is experiencing physical pain. Internally, Vanessa muses that their dynamic once more resembles a legitimate romance, rather than a temporary seasonal fling carrying a predetermined conclusion. Beneath these romantic reflections lies the lingering recollection of Madame Luther's farewell statement, emphasizing her refusal to accept immediate bribes while suggesting future correspondence should a pregnancy occur. The evaluator had also imparted a final warning, stressing that such illicit affairs are fundamentally impossible to sustain indefinitely. Fostering a counterfeit romance, the woman cautioned, would ultimately result in the noblewoman suffering profound emotional damage. Intertwined with this recollection is Liam's audible insistence that she prioritize her physical well-being, followed by her own verbal commitment to do so. These contrasting mental images coexist, growing increasingly difficult to separate as the sunny season progresses. Returning to the present moment within the horticultural cabin, Liam inquires if Vanessa must depart for the main house. He points out her usual habit of retreating prematurely to avoid the searching eyes of her personal servant. Keeping her eyes glued to her novel, Vanessa informs him that a traveling carnival has arrived in Bath, drawing everyone away and finally granting her abundant free time. Liam questions whether attending the spectacle interests her. Lifting her gaze at last, she queries the sudden inspiration behind his proposal. He observes that her demeanor strongly suggests a desperate yearning to witness the event. She argues that encountering a familiar face would spell catastrophe, as her uncle would absolutely refuse to overlook such a transgression. Observing her in silence for a moment, Liam extends his arm and places a hat upon her crown. The solution is uncomplicated, he reassures her. She merely needs to ensure her presence remains entirely undetected. A vibrant energy pulses through the carnival grounds, filled with joyous laughter and bustling crowds navigating all paths. Strolling alongside Liam, Vanessa nervously adjusts her garments, complaining of discomfort and the sensation of drawing peculiar stares from bystanders. He dryly remarks that her supposed self-consciousness didn't seem to hinder her extensive purchasing activities. Elevating the bulky sack, she clarifies that an upcoming natal anniversary for a companion prompted her to acquire gifts during this rare, unsupervised excursion. An ornamental pin intended for Rosaline and sleeve fasteners meant for Blair. She then seeks his opinion on whether the recipients will appreciate her selections. Prior to Liam formulating a response, pyrotechnics erupt across the heavens, instantly drawing Vanessa's upward gaze. "Incredible," she breathes out in awe. She subsequently remarks, "What a gorgeous display." Pivoting toward Liam, she points out the insect-patterned explosion that just detonated, questioning if he caught the sight, to which he answers affirmatively. Instantly accusing him of falsehood, she insists his eyes were fixed entirely on her features, then urges him to follow her. Citing the imminent commencement of the main performance, she strides forward, leaving him to observe her retreating figure. Liam contemplates how the current season resembles a transient illusion destined never to repeat. He reflects on how their connection has been steeped in deception since its inception. Moreover, the hypothetical scenario of crossing paths later in life is abruptly interrupted in his mind. His musings are shattered when someone in the throng shouts for a commanding officer. A youthful maritime sailor offers a respectful bow before him, expressing immense privilege at the encounter. The sailor mentions rumors of the commander vacationing in the southern region, expressing sheer disbelief at this coincidental meeting. Introducing himself as Enon Campbell of the 4th Regiment, he encourages Liam to drop any formalities. Releasing a weary breath, Liam identifies himself merely as a subordinate named Ross. "Excuse me?" Campbell replies in visible confusion. Asserting that a case of mistaken identity has occurred, Liam watches Campbell attempt a rebuttal, just as Vanessa returns while vocalizing the name River. Liam shifts his attention to the young woman. Her gaze alternates between her companion and the bewildered sailor. The trio remains frozen amidst the festival attendees, transforming the previously carefree twilight into a vastly more complex situation than it had been moments prior. A single slip of the tongue from Campbell could utterly demolish the intricate facade Liam had meticulously constructed since descending from the orchard and choosing to remain. Briefly assessing Liam's demeanor, Vanessa prepares to utter his moniker. Yet before she manages to articulate a full phrase, sheer terror sets in as she realizes her shopping sack has vanished. The impending dialogue is immediately rendered entirely unimportant. She details how the item went missing during her inspection of a merchant's booth near the narrow passage. Shortly thereafter, the pair is situated within a law enforcement precinct, filing an official complaint. Absorbing the details attentively, the constable nods, noting that such larcenies have grown surprisingly frequent in the area. Commencing the documentation process, the official requests her identity. Instantaneous paralysis grips Vanessa. Providing her authentic title would guarantee the document's eventual arrival at her uncle's desk. This would trigger interrogations, boundaries, and a renewed cycle of oppressive monitoring. The ensuing pause lingers until the constable detects her hesitation. Preempting Vanessa's attempt to fabricate a reply, Liam elegantly intervenes, setting a credential on the surface and announcing his own identity. Identifying himself as Theo, he claims the role of her escort and instructs the precinct to forward any developments strictly to his attention. Acknowledging the provided details, the constable vows to reach out should the stolen property be retrieved. Upon exiting the constabulary, Vanessa casts a skeptical glance his way, noting that his chosen alias bears a striking resemblance to Theodore. She demands to understand precisely when he settled on utilizing that particular pseudonym. Liam merely offers a grin, behaving as though the explanation requires no words. The instant they transition onto a more secluded avenue, Liam abruptly grasps her palm. Preventing her from questioning his intent, he drags her into a tight corridor and softly pins her back to the brickwork. He proceeds to lock lips with her, the sheer abruptness of the action obliterating all rational cognition from her mind. The bustling urban clamor vanishes completely for a fleeting second. Liam realizes he is embracing her more tightly than planned, desiring such proximity that their pulsing chests might synchronize. This sudden surge of emotion takes him by surprise. Panting and flustered, Vanessa finally withdraws, quickly whispering that this is the wrong place. Crucially, she insists that Theodore must be patient. Hearing that specific moniker causes Liam to freeze. Rubbing his brow with a heavy exhale, he alters his course to gently press his lips against her crown. Next, he questions what kind of inappropriate action she assumed he was preparing to commit. His inquiry merely deepens Vanessa's profound humiliation. Shortly thereafter, the pair finds themselves perched upon an overpass, gazing at the stream below, where urban illuminations dance on the current as dusk descends. Vanessa comments on their failure to enter the carnival tent, noting that an earlier arrival was necessary given the rapid depletion of passes. Offering a bribe to the gatekeeper could have easily resolved the issue, Liam observes. Such financial recklessness is the precise path to utter ruin, Vanessa protests without hesitation. His bedchamber is already littered with proof of his extravagant purchases, boasting premium goods valuable enough to sustain a whole household. As Liam arches a brow, Vanessa assertively declares that common folk never accumulate wealth through frivolous expenditures, citing Mary as proof. Displaying growing entertainment throughout her lecture, he questions the validity of her claim, which Vanessa resolutely defends. Slumping against the barrier to study the waterway, she relishes the crisp breeze and confesses her exhaustion regarding her royal obligations back at the fortress. Fleeing to any unknown destination has become her frequent desire recently, a revelation Liam digests while leaning backward on the banister to observe her. A transient recollection emerges in his mind, echoing a recognizable tone lamenting the inability to tolerate a specific location. This distant voice had sworn to come back once matters were resolved, a vow specifically made to Theodore. Dissipating rapidly, the flashback leaves him with the cynical understanding that individuals frequently make hollow commitments. Staring at Vanessa, Liam silently questions if she too will vanish the instant her situation shifts. When he finally breaks the silence, a bewildered Vanessa blinks and demands clarification regarding his cryptic remark. With nonchalance, Liam proposes that they abscond as a pair. Grasping palms and fleeing is suggested in a breezy, seemingly joking manner. However, an eerie stillness immediately envelops them, as both inherently recognize the heavy reality underlying the whimsical delivery. True liberty eludes them both, which ironically makes the prospect of escaping incredibly alluring. Propped on the overpass barricade, Liam offhandedly floats the notion of a joint elopement, prompting Vanessa to swiftly deflect and ask if the urge to flee is actually his own. Liam highlights the fact that she was the person expressing desires of desertion mere moments prior. Nevertheless, Vanessa declines the idea, noting that the poetic appeal of running evaporates once the harsh consequences arrive. Should she vanish, her closest companions would face immediate interrogation. Her handmaidens would face severe unemployment due to the stigma of controversy, while bounties bearing her portrait would blanket Ingram. Any benevolent soul offering assistance would inevitably be entangled in the resulting catastrophe. Deeper contemplation only solidified the impossibility of absconding, though luckily, she has formulated an alternative strategy. The expression she now wears instantly displeases Liam. Vanessa outlines her scheme to orchestrate fabricated gossip linking her to numerous different gentlemen. By doing so, public attention will be successfully diverted away from him. Gentlemen thoroughly enjoy boasting about their ties to beautiful ladies, meaning her mere silence will encourage them to propagate tales independently. Over time, the masses will deduce she possesses a legion of suitors, eliminating the scrutiny placed on any solitary individual. After studying her silently for a moment, Liam questions if this genius plot truly involves launching herself at every available bachelor. His phrasing drops with unintentional harshness, yet Vanessa merely agrees, embodying a paradox of extreme caution and profound negligence that grates on his nerves immensely. The strain dissipates as Vanessa flashes a sudden grin, confessing that this outing provided a level of tranquility she hasn't experienced in ages. Expressing gratitude for the experience, she concedes that this particular afternoon will likely remain etched in her mind forever. Vanessa flutters her eyelashes in bewilderment when Liam promptly accuses her of speaking falsehoods. Slouching against the barrier, the youth insists that his features will fade from her memory within a few short years, as human recollection is inherently flawed. Vehemently, Vanessa disputes this pessimistic prediction. Liam points out her prior failure to recall the childhood visage of River Ross. Refusing to concede, Vanessa adamantly claims her recollection is absolutely flawless. Intrigued, Liam challenges her to provide specific descriptions. Liam gapes at her in stunned silence after she assertively attributes ebony locks and sapphire irises to the boy. Her depiction is so utterly inaccurate that he nearly bursts into a fit of chuckles. Simultaneously, the erroneous statement inflicts unexpected emotional pain, prompting him to rub his brow and label it as yet another fabrication. Vanessa mounts an instantaneous defense. She argues the impossibility of deceit while gazing straight into his pupils, a challenge that suspends heavily in the air. Silence reigns as their dialogue edges perilously near a profound reality that both remain unprepared to confront. Upon returning to the manor later that night and shoving her bedchamber door wide, Vanessa experiences a massive jolt of terror. Blair is currently occupying the shadowy room in anticipation of her arrival. Vanessa aggressively questions his presence and interrogates him regarding the duration of his uninvited stay. Furthermore, she probes the reason behind Rosaline mandating her lengthy absence if this confrontation was the ultimate objective. With composure, Blair clarifies that the girl has suffered from sickness for quite some time. Rosaline had harbored authentic concern because her high temperature obstinately persisted. Hastily asserting her recovered health, Vanessa pivots to demanding an explanation for his infiltration of her private quarters. Intercepting her attempt to divert the conversation, Blair thoroughly inspects her appearance and queries her precise whereabouts. Stifled by the estate's atmosphere, Vanessa claims she merely departed for a leisurely stroll. This explanation fails to sway Blair's skepticism. Vanessa goes rigid when he grabs her limb to prevent her from navigating around his seated figure. Reminding her of her inability to maintain eye contact while deceiving him, Blair speaks softly, prompting Vanessa to challenge his current behavior. Locking eyes with her, Blair finally unleashes the pivotal inquiry of the night. Had she acquired a romantic partner while he was distracted? Pinpointing a sailor in particular, he plunges the space into quietude as a mute Vanessa stares back, her pulse accelerating fiercely by the moment. He reveals his eyewitness account of her rendezvous with a maritime official. Vanessa hastily clarifies that River is nothing more than a long-standing companion from their youth. Stumbling across each other following an extended separation, they had merely enjoyed a pleasant reunion. Not a single shred of belief crosses Blair's features. Highlighting the subtle blemishes on her throat, he softly questions if platonic acquaintances typically bestow such physical souvenirs, causing Vanessa to flush with profound shame. She commands him to cease his accusations. Undeterred, Blair pushes forward, inquiring if she grasps her own exploitation, and whether her uncle is aware of this enigmatic seaman. Reaching her breaking point, Vanessa wrenches her arm free and dares him to lay a hand on Liam if he feels bold enough. She subsequently challenges his authority to subject her to such treatment, a fiery response that visibly shocks Blair. Inhaling unsteadily, Vanessa instructs him to halt his blatant overstepping of personal limits, particularly out of respect for his betrothed. That specific mention immediately transforms his entire countenance. Following a prolonged lull, Blair softly discloses a secret previously hidden from her knowledge. His matriarch is already convinced that Vanessa surrendered her virtue to her uncle, a statement that strikes like a fist, freezing Vanessa in place. Continuing his tale, Blair explains how Rosaline erupted into absolute fury upon hearing the scandalous claim. The resulting dispute escalated so drastically that she suffered confinement throughout the majority of the holiday. Abruptly, Vanessa recalls Rosaline abandoning the nautical excursion she had eagerly anticipated for 12 months. His mother attributed Rosaline's defiance entirely to Vanessa, Blair elaborates, even contemplating a letter to the school's directress to orchestrate her dismissal. The crisis was only averted when Blair capitulated and consented to the marriage arrangement. Accepting the betrothal was the mandatory toll demanded to settle the turmoil. He berates Vanessa for her complete ignorance regarding the entire ordeal. Departing before she can muster a reply, he abandons her to the quiet solitude of the room. Eventually, her gaze wanders down to the discarded headpiece resting on the ground. She finally comprehends the massive weight of the unseen troubles her acquaintances have been shouldering behind her back. Navigating to the horticultural outbuilding later that evening, Blair enters the confined structure and comments on the sheer absurdity of the situation. The Duke of Battenberg, the very individual the monarchy is frantically hunting, is taking refuge in a shack deemed unworthy by ordinary aristocrats. He deduces that Vanessa is still operating under the illusion that Liam is merely a standard military sailor. Sniping at foliage with his shears, Liam casually concurs that the mistaken identity is a regrettable affair. Blair finds his tolerance rapidly evaporating. Delaying a sovereign matrimonial offer so publicly has transformed the monarch into an international and domestic joke, he notes. Absorbing the rant in silence, Liam eventually questions the root of Blair's intense preoccupation with the crown's reputation. Should his concern run so deeply, he might as well offer himself up to be the future husband. The hand of Blair Fabian Winchester clenches into a rigid ball. He instructs Liam Theodore Battenberg to conclude his unresolved affairs and depart in short order. The sole cause for his prior restraint stems from a desire to protect the public standing of Vanessa Siren Somerset. Liam Theodore Battenberg discovers a distinct sense of humor in that particular response. Based on the lady's own admission, obliterating her good name seems to serve as the primary objective. Did this outcome not align perfectly with the very desires of Blair Fabian Winchester? The young man instantly refutes the claim, yet his opponent refuses to drop the subject. With absolute composure, he brings up the prolonged stares, the meticulous watching, and every subtle clue the boy likely believed was concealed from the world. To Liam Theodore Battenberg, the entire predicament takes on an agonizingly clear nature. Back when the boy assumed he faced a mundane military man, he may have fantasized that a public disgrace would render Vanessa Siren Somerset far more accessible. If her societal prestige crumbled to dust, she might ultimately find herself stripped of alternative refuges. Staring straight into his eyes, Liam Theodore Battenberg points out the tragic irony that the seemingly pure outreach initiated by Blair Fabian Winchester inadvertently grasped a member of the Battenberg lineage. The accused fiercely labels this allegation as nothing but malicious defamation. Questioning if their exchange has concluded, the man notes his own severe lack of free time compared to other individuals. Their dialogue ought to terminate at that moment, yet the desperate youth advances apace, begging for a halt before Vanessa Siren Somerset sustains additional emotional damage. Unexpectedly catching his rival off guard, the young gentleman suddenly lowers himself to the ground in a kneeling posture. Displaying genuine, almost frantic earnestness, Blair Fabian Winchester confesses that he values Vanessa Siren Somerset above all worldly matters. A temporary hush completely envelops the rustic storage structure. Breaking the stillness, Liam Theodore Battenberg poses a straightforward inquiry regarding the precise nature of what the youth could possibly provide for the lady. Would it merely be an existence of concealing his true affections from his matriarch, alongside endless decades filled with concessions and fabricated justifications? Raising his gaze at a sluggish pace, profound astonishment washes over the boy's features. The older man challenges him to point out any falsehood in that assessment. Based upon the ensuing quietness, the truth of the matter proves deeply unpalatable to both parties involved. Sprawled across the mattress of Vanessa Siren Somerset, Rosaline Fabian Winchester loudly proclaims her brother's incomprehensible nature due to his sudden abandonment of their extensive travels. The sister expresses utter disbelief that she shares the exact same maternal parentage with such an erratic individual. She brings up their impending return to the capital, noting they shall reside at a lodging establishment in Bath in the interim. While outfitting herself in fresh garments, Vanessa Siren Somerset extends an open invitation for them to remain at the grand estate should commercial accommodations prove unpleasant. Emitting a weary breath, Rosaline Fabian Winchester remarks that lingering there would inevitably provoke her enraged parent into storming over to forcibly retrieve her. Following that statement, the young woman offers a sincere expression of regret. In response, the bride-to-be insists there is no need for contrition over an undeniable fact. Despite current tensions, the matriarch provided excellent nurturing during her early childhood years. Although an emotional rift formed following the demise of her mother and father, profound appreciation for the lady endures. A brief pause follows the sentiment until Vanessa Siren Somerset recalls the warning from Blair Fabian Winchester regarding his mother's firm belief that the maiden's virtue was stolen by a familial elder. The matron attributed the rebellion of Rosaline Fabian Winchester to her friend's corruption, going so far as drafting a letter to the Academy's directress to insist upon immediate banishment. The sister notes that the older woman will likely remain silent temporarily, given that the nuptials of her son have been expedited. Seeking clarification, the bride-to-be questions the underlying meaning of that remark. Since their grand expedition fell through, the groom was essentially hauled directly to the marriage ceremony, her friend elaborates. Oddly enough, he seems to relish the local vicinity, investigating neighboring properties, prompting his sister to vocalize her concerns about the immense burden such a remote residence will place upon his betrothed. At that juncture, Mary makes her presence known, informing her mistress that preparations are complete. The impatient friend urges her to hasten her pace and emerge at once. Peering into the mirror, Vanessa Siren Somerset questions whether her appearance comes across as peculiar. Locking her gaze on the bride, Rosaline Fabian Winchester exclaims in awe about the sheer magnitude of her breathtaking loveliness. The sight is so stunning that it incites an urge within her to immediately hunt down the elderly nobleman. Reaching out to grasp her friend's fingers, the bride-to-be murmurs her moniker with gentle affection. The young woman explains the tradition dictating that a bride's dearest companion must view the bridal headpiece prior to anyone else to ensure marital bliss. Despite harboring an intense loathing for the gentleman claiming the hand of Vanessa Siren Somerset, this specific occasion remains an unparalleled, singular event in a person's existence. She expresses profound joy over having the privilege to witness such a spectacle firsthand. With hushed gratitude, the bride acknowledges the touching sentiment. Completely oblivious, both women fail to spot Blair Fabian Winchester lingering within the slightly open entrance, observing their interaction. Concurrently, within the walls of the Winchester residence, a dialogue of a much graver nature unfolds as Henry Winchester converses with his spouse, Louise, noting rumors that their son plans to observe his post-nuptial holiday in the southern regions. Louise insists this outcome perfectly validates her prior warnings against permitting their offspring to idle away their days in that particular locale. Henry counters by stating he harbors no objections to their youths associating with Vanessa Siren Somerset. Conversely, his wife expresses a vehement distaste for witnessing their children perpetually ensnared by the girl's pull. Cradling her cheeks, Henry frankly points out that such recurring situations inevitably culminate in this exact brand of frantic anxiety. Following that, he poses a subtly delivered yet monumentally impactful inquiry. He questions if biological kin possess an innate ability to sense one another, raising the possibility that their offspring might eventually identify their genuine sire. The narrative suddenly shifts to a bygone era, featuring a kneeling Louise while Henry towers above, demanding to know who else shares the knowledge of her impending motherhood. She assures him that the secret belongs exclusively to him and the other gentlemen involved. Henry advises her to deliberate with caution, declaring that should she truly be carrying an infant, he shall claim the unborn baby as his own, ensuring their marriage ceremony moves forward without delay. Her sole required duty involves remaining steadfastly by his side and bringing the infant into the world. Grasping her fingers, he vows that this arrangement shall serve as the singular penalty inflicted upon both her and her lover. Returning to the bridal chambers, Blair Fabian Winchester gently forces the entryway wider and crosses the threshold. Startled by the intrusion, Rosalind Fabian Winchester and the bride simultaneously raise their eyes. The young man's gaze immediately locks onto Vanessa Siren Somerset and refuses to waver. A heavy, unvoiced tension fills the space, laden with truths that no individual present possesses the courage to vocalize. Stationed at his workspace, Liam Theodore Battenberg finds his thoughts meandering toward the image of his lover, picturing her looming nearby, demanding his signature upon a document, musing on her apparent insanity, just as he realizes an uninvited guest has occupied the chair opposite his own. He firmly informs the intruder that he has no memory of granting authorization for her to take a seat. Offering a polite grin, the lady requests seating permission retroactively, thrusting her hand forward to announce her identity as Haley G. Morton. The officer interrogates her regarding her source of information, suspecting either his aristocratic cousin or his matriarchal elder provided his location. The newly arrived woman apologetically states her inability to provide a response to that inquiry, citing a desire to avoid causing him distress with facts, while simultaneously refusing to fabricate a falsehood that might damage their nascent rapport. Liam Theodore Battenberg dismisses her reasoning as utter nonsense, given their exceedingly brief history of interaction. The visitor reveals she caught wind of Southern gossip suggesting he is deeply involved in a committed romance. Should this hearsay prove accurate, she insists he will eventually require her assistance, mirroring her own necessity for his cooperation. Her tranquil delivery implies a level of premeditation regarding the scenario that vastly exceeds his own contemplation. Within the confines of the garden outbuilding, Liam Theodore Battenberg and Vanessa Siren Somerset occupy a bathing basin, where she adamantly insists she requires no assistance with her ablutions. He points out her recent fatigue and their prolonged separation, prompting a flush to paint the lady's cheeks as she blames his relentless demands for her drained state. Crucially, she adds that her bridal gown measurements were finalized during his absence, meaning the fast-approaching autumnal season will bring the undeniable reality of her nuptials. Her tone bears an immense, unspoken burden, suggesting she is attempting to reinforce the impending truth in her own mind, just as much as conveying it to him. Prior to this intimate encounter, Liam Theodore Battenberg engaged in a telephone conversation where his matriarch promised to cease all regal betrothal negotiations provided he deemed the Morton heiress satisfactory. He retorted with full awareness of her orchestrating the visit, declaring the proposed candidate utterly inadequate and firmly rejecting any prospect of wedding into the monarchy. The elder family member demands to know if his ultimate design involves severing the noble bloodline forever. She highlights the prestigious foundational status of the Morton clan within Ingram, arguing that if a regal union is a fate worse than death, this alternative serves as the optimal method to demonstrate his familial devotion. The young officer attempted to interrupt her tirade. Addressing him by his middle name, the matriarch reminded him of the tragic aftermath they both observed stemming from the idiotic romance of his mother and father. Promising to overlook his holiday indiscretions, she merely requested a trio of meetings with the prospective bride before she would honor his final verdict. She confessed that the entire ordeal was causing her profound emotional anguish. Her lifelong counsel consistently warned against abandoning their dynasty for a concept as fleeting and insignificant as romance. Clasping his fingers together, Liam Theodore Battenberg silently ponders the very definition of such a sentiment. After all, the connection he currently maintains is entirely founded upon a bedrock of falsehoods and continuous deception. Currently, he clings to that cynical realization as if it possesses some profound significance. Returning to the bathing scene, Vanessa Siren Somerset silently unravels his internal rationalizations simply by observing his unguarded expressions when he assumes her attention is elsewhere. The young woman reflects on the way River Ross occasionally gazes at her, projecting an illusion of an eternally lasting summer season. His stares convey a desperate hope that their ephemeral bond might somehow survive the changing of the seasons. That particular gaze leaves her completely lost, and frankly, he finds himself equally baffled by it. His refusal to confess the truth is rapidly turning into the most glaring elephant in the room. While Liam Theodore Battenberg jots down notes inside the outdoor tool cabin, Vanessa Siren Somerset informs him of her upcoming 7-day absence from the manor beginning the following day. Raising his gaze, he inquires about the reason behind her departure. She clarifies that she finally accepted a previously declined invitation to join Count Rowden on a shooting excursion organized by the Essex household. However, she was advised to gain some practical exposure prior to the nuptials, given the groom's supposed passion for the sport. Liam Theodore Battenberg questions whether she has any prior background in stalking game. Admitting her complete ignorance, she confesses she lacks the slightest clue about gripping a firearm. A brief, silent exchange passes between them until he rises to his feet, extending his palm and instructing her to grasp it. Grabbing a parasol to serve as an impromptu musket, he directs her to wedge it more firmly into her clavicle. When she questions the correctness of her posture, he warns that maintaining such an inclination would surely pop her joint out of its socket. Continuing his instruction, he notes that an actual weapon carries far more weight, urging her to widen her stance and align her spine perfectly. A crimson flush creeps across Vanessa Siren Somerset's cheeks as he suggests elevating the aim slightly. He reassures her that the staff shall manage the ammunition, leaving her solely responsible for maintaining the correct grip. His articulate and precise instructions confirm her belief in his authentic background as a maritime commander. In a hushed tone, he mentions that humanity relies on firearms rather than bare knuckles or predatory teeth. He philosophizes that gunpowder offers an equitable form of dominance, enabling even the weakest individual to execute a lethal strike. Furthermore, he cautions that familiarity with the weapon might blur the line between human and beast, leading one to fire indiscriminately. Following this grim observation, he mimics a gunshot by whispering the word bang. The sudden sound causes Vanessa Siren Somerset to jolt violently, letting the parasol slip from her grasp. In that fleeting second, a profound realization strikes her. Should River Ross genuinely harbor romantic feelings for her, it becomes absolutely imperative to drive a much larger wedge between them. Following that train of thought, she leans in and locks lips with him. Beneath the surface of their embrace, her mind insists that her own tainted existence must not blemish the promising career of a military man. Assuming this deep emotion is truly genuine affection, she resolves to honor the sentiment by refusing to act as his Achilles heel. This deduction stands as the most altruistic yet devastating resolution she could possibly formulate. Tragically, this epiphany blossoms precisely in the midst of their passionate kiss. Upon the arrival of dawn, Vanessa Siren Somerset and Mary find themselves navigating the urban thoroughfares inside an automobile. Glancing in her direction, Mary remarks that her companion appears exceptionally unwell. Vanessa Siren Somerset dismisses the concern, attributing her pallor to a mild bout of motion sickness. Grumbling about the outdated transport, Mary wonders aloud why the lord of the manor provided such an archaic relic when numerous modern options were available. In response, Vanessa Siren Somerset notes that Count Somerset cherishes this specific model, having applied the exterior coat manually and arranged for the motor's overseas delivery himself. The chauffeur subsequently declares their imminent arrival at Kingston Street, noting that crossing this threshold will put them squarely on Essex land. Falling into a sudden silence, she averts her gaze as a childhood recollection of an eavesdropped conversation bubbles up. She recalls a servant informing Count Somerset that the tragedy occurred on Kingston Street, where the horse-drawn transport flipped, condemning both passengers. Though the statement was abruptly halted, she has shouldered the agonizing burden of that unfinished thought for years. Returning to reality, she mentally reassures herself that all is well and no calamity awaits them. Without warning, the automobile slams to a halt, thrusting her torso abruptly toward the dashboard. Concurrently traveling in a coach along an entirely separate route, Liam Theodore Battenberg reviews the commission dossier concerning Vanessa Siren Somerset, finding its contents far from trivial. Roughly 4 weeks prior to the previous patriarch's dubious demise, the familial estate was abruptly diverted to the man now holding the title, with paperwork riddled with highly dubious alterations, while the legal representative who notarized the transfer vanished completely. The private detective's notes promise further probing into these mysteries, vowing to deliver additional updates soon. Liam Theodore Battenberg creases the parchment, tucking it securely within the breast pocket of his coat. Muttering under his breath, he concludes that Vanessa Siren Somerset ought to be aiming her firearm at a vastly different target. The profound implications of his whispered remark fill the cabin's atmosphere with a palpable, stormy tension. Returning to the scene on Kingston Street, Vanessa Siren Somerset lies insensate within the vehicle, crimson staining her scalp amid an eerie calm on the thoroughfare. She regains consciousness to find scarlet fluid streaking her cheek and Mary frantically shrieking her moniker. Prior to the maid completing her frantic visual assessment, Vanessa Siren Somerset is already inquiring about her companion's physical well-being. This altruistic reflex perfectly encapsulates her character, fretting over others despite a cranial hemorrhage, prompting Mary to confirm her own safety while urging immediate care for the bleeding brow. Dismissing her own injury as minor, she demands an explanation for the sudden stop, to which Mary theorizes a madman leapt onto the road, instructing her mistress to remain seated during the investigation. Beyond the vehicle's doors, the chauffeur looms over a fallen figure, grumbling aloud about the sheer absurdity of throwing oneself into traffic at this specific location. Bending down near the casualty, Vanessa Siren Somerset asks the prostrate stranger if mobility is still possible. As the injured fellow elevates his chin with a loud groan, Mary violently yanks her mistress backward to spare her garments from further gore. Unfazed, she commands her attendant to summon a physician without delay, citing the victim's obvious suffering. Suddenly, the downed pedestrian begins rambling, claiming intimate knowledge of the automobile, from its unique motor hum down to its exact paint shade and intricate features. He audaciously demands a larger bribe for his silence, boasting of prior experience in such shady endeavors and promising unwavering obedience as long as the cash keeps flowing. Fixing him with an intense glare, Vanessa Siren Somerset demands to know precisely what sort of scoundrel he truly is. A pair of constables swiftly arrive on the scene. One forcefully hoists the swindler by the collar, reprimanding him for repeating his usual scam. Simultaneously, the second patrolman clarifies to the ladies that this serial fraudster habitually flings himself before distinctively painted vehicles to swindle wealthy motorists. When she points out his severe hemorrhaging, the lawman reveals the use of a hidden bladder filled with fake gore to simulate injury, wishes them safe travels, and departs. Vindicating her earlier suspicions about his fraudulent nature, Mary quickly pivots to fretting over her mistress's soiled gown and Count Rowden's anticipated reaction to such a disheveled appearance. However, neither the stained attire nor the waiting nobleman occupies Vanessa Siren Somerset's thoughts, as her attention is entirely captivated by a pendant now resting in her palm. Upon Mary questioning the jewelry's origin, she deduces that the charlatan must have inadvertently left it behind. Gazing deeply at the trinket, her surroundings fade into a singular flashback of her late sire dangling the piece and praising its beauty. She recalls him promising to commission a miniature painting for its interior, ensuring he could gaze upon her visage whenever distance separated them. The tender affection of that reminiscence colliding with the object's sheer significance right here on Kingston Street impacts her psyche with dual force. Locking eyes with her maid, she orders the immediate location of a communication device to inform the Essex estate that an emergency will prevent her attendance. Shocked by this sudden change of plans, Mary shrieks in absolute disbelief. Undeterred, Vanessa Siren Somerset begins marching away, declaring that an urgent destination requires her immediate presence. When pressed for a location, she names Gloucester Castle to confront Count Somerset, continuing her stride while clutching the locket containing her family's likeness, as if her life depended on keeping it secure. Far away at the Essex Manor, Liam Theodore Battenberg occupies a seat opposite the host and Edgar, waiting as a document undergoes close scrutiny. The nobleman admits his inability to render a solitary verdict, requesting permission to summon his household's financial expert. Granting his consent effortlessly, Liam Theodore Battenberg watches the aristocrat exit the chamber. This departure leaves Edgar staring critically at the naval officer, questioning the sanity of constructing a southern hippodrome merely for the sake of one female. He defends the decision by noting he had debated both eastern and southern territories from the start. Given the equal projected profits, he merely chose the most personally advantageous route. Pressing further, Edgar demands to know if formal matrimony is genuinely on the table for this secret lover. Inwardly, Liam Theodore Battenberg dwells on the memory of her addressing him as River Ross, recalling how effortlessly and intimately the moniker rolled off her tongue. Outwardly, however, he proclaims that wedding Vanessa Siren Somerset would constitute a catastrophic disgrace to his dignity and turn his prestigious lineage into a spectacular laughingstock. A solitary chuckle escapes his lips, his tone laced with such rigid finality that it seems he is desperately fighting to persuade himself of his own cynical cruelty.